We're back. The Springboks are back from a couple of weeks off. A couple of the URC guys had a couple of weeks of action. The Japanese players didn't have any action, and we had a very interesting selection yesterday. Seven of those Japanese players in the Springbok side, and Rossi saying afterwards that a lot this game in a way was to get those Japanese players some game time, because he says in the past when they've gone up to places like Ireland, they felt those guys were half a step behind. With me as always is Gavin Rich and Nick Mallett. Guys, welcome. Just Nick, let's start with you. Just your thoughts on the team to play Japan.
Well, a very experienced one, in a lot of positions. I think more and more Rusty has had the opportunity to play players. So you're getting players who you bring in and you're not surprised. They've probably had, a guy like Sasha now would have had more than 10 caps, I think. So, you're pretty used to his performances have been so good that when he starts, no one says, gee, that's a surprise. I think obviously Zach Porthen is the big talking point. I mean, he's been an outstanding rugby player, captain for the under-21s. Interestingly enough, scrummaging was not his strong point when he was an under-21 player. He was a wonderful ball carrier, had huge battle stats around the field, great carries, great tackle counts, good cleans, a great rugby player just in general. But I just want to, put in a word of congratulations to Brock Harris, who's doing the scrummaging for the Stormers. He's taken him from the beginning of the season when he joined the Stormers camp and has worked incredibly hard on getting his posture right. And he's been outstanding in the first 5 games of the URC. He hasn't gone backwards against some very good looseheads. The Leinster loosehead was good, as was the guy from Benetton and Zebra. They're both international players. So congratulations to him, and it's a great opportunity for him to play his first test against Japan, not renowned scrummagers, obviously, and with Marks next to him and Ox. Jeepers, that's a really nice soft landing as your opening test match.
Gav, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll just continue where Nick left off there about the scrumming culture, as I like to call it, at the Stormers. Like Vernon Matonga obviously is still Zimbabwean, so he doesn't qualify for the BOKS at the moment. But he really astounded me last season how he developed as a scrummager as well. And I'm good mates with Grant Bashford in Durban, who coached Vernon at Northwood, and he was completely astounded by the fact that, because one of Vernon's, scrumming wasn't really Vernon's big strong point then. He was a very good player, obviously, and he went to Stellenbosch off the back of being a really good player. But just watching him develop at the Stormers, and there's other guys coming through, it just seems that and of course they're getting Wilco Low next year, and Zachary Porthen now qualified, and if France Malherbe plays again, I mean, they can have 4 Springbok tight ends on their books, which is absolutely like sort of astounding. But yeah, so there's that. There's you have to say they're tight ends that play till they're 30 before they get any kind of recognition, and this guy's getting recognition at a ridiculously young age. And I know there would probably be some people out there who sort of say, well, you're giving away Springbok caps too easily, and I hear what they're saying, but he's incredibly young for a tight end, but if he's blooded this young, then imagine how good he can be when he develops and he becomes the age that a tight end's supposed to be, which is like late 20s, early 30s. So that's amazing. Otherwise, the rest of the team is, as Nick says, a very experienced team, and it'll be interesting to see how many of the combinations in this team would then be carried over into the French game. It certainly looks at the moment as if Kobus, Ranach, and Sasha are the first choice, the go-to sort of halfback combination at the moment. And for the rest of them, well, there's a lot of them. I mean, there's a lot of potential combinations there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes on Saturday.
Yeah, I think the interesting one. I mean, look, the Japanese players. There's some guys who obviously need game time, but if you look at that back three as well, it's a hell of an exciting back three. Cheslin at fullback, Kirtley on the wing, and Ethan Hooker, who obviously has done enough to keep his place as well. The 2 centers, and it's a continuation from the Rugby Championship in a way. And Rossi did say Damien Willemse probably would have played, but His hamstring, they weren't 100% sure, so they didn't want to risk him. So probably just give him another week, and he'll probably be back next week as well. And that lock pairing is an interesting one. Lurton Erkje Snyman, that's a hell of a mobile lock pairing, and they all know the Japanese players. I suppose that counts in their favor as well. There's going to be no surprises for those guys on the team.
Brendan, if I could just say something quickly. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah.
Just say something. So you mentioned Damien Willemse, and I just want to say that whilst we're on the subject of Damien Willemse, is hats off to him for playing till the 80th minute, apparently because, I've spent quite a bit of time in Sharks country recently, and I think there's a lot of talk about, how much the Springboks give for their jerseys and that. And it's just absolutely brilliant to see a guy like Willemse knowing that he could be putting his Springbok opportunity in jeopardy. And apparently, according to what I heard from John Dobson, was that, he had the hamstring strain, so he moved to the wing. And that's the sort of, you play for the Springboks and you looking forward to playing for the Springboks on the overseas tour, but you've still got your mates that are there like 6 months of the year that you play for and who pay the bulk of your salary. And I just like that attitude from him. Certainly the way I've seen it from a distance. I mean, obviously I haven't spoken to Damien, but it just seems to me that there was a selfless act on his part to play out the game there, and that's the sort of I think all the franchises coaches, which is that they all had Springboks who would do that. Just my take. That's just from me. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, no problem at all. No, and I'll back you on that. I know him personally. I've been at quite a few of the Stormers practices. Dob is a mate of mine, and I he invites me down just to have a look on a couple of occasions. And he's an extraordinary personality. He's so competitive. He just loves playing for the Stormers. And what he did there showed, as you said, perfectly, just selflessness. Just thinking about his teammates. And funny enough, Reinach as well. Going there, he's about to start on a tour. He knows he's got a good chance of being number one. And yet, didn't hesitate to say to Dobber, no, I'll come for the Benetton game. I'd love to be on the bench. Came off the bench, gave it his best shot. And, he's also got a great attitude as well. Sasha's played a lot, and Sasha asked if he could have the Benetton game off, but he says, I'll give you another game later. So what he's done is apparently there's the Lions away or something like that. There's a quite a big game that he says he'd love to play in, which he would have taken a leave for or rest for. So I think there's a really good player coach sort of attitude to the commitment to their franchise at the Stormers, and but obviously there aren't as many Springboks at the Stormers as there are at both the Bulls and the Sharks. So it's it's far more complicated for Ruan Ackerman and for John Plumtree than not Ruan, sorry, Ackers than it is for Dom. Yeah. Going to your point about the Japanese players. Rassie just doesn't miss a trick, does he? He asked for this friendly against Japan in order to make sure that the first game we played wasn't against France, where the guys who would be introduced had missed out on a bit of rugby. So it is a stronger team than I would have expected against Japan. I would have thought that there might have been sort of more changes and more opportunities given to younger players. But clearly he's preparing for the French game. And I think the game following Japan is going to be our biggest test on this tour. My feeling is that I know they've got a lot of injuries and Dupont won't play. And, but the strength in depth in France is equal to the strength in depth in South Africa. And it's one of the very few nations that can match us in terms of talent. So that is the big game of the tournament, I think, bigger than Ireland. And he's preparing the team as best he can, with this as a preview to the French game.
Yeah, obviously yesterday there was a lot of talk from some of the UK journalists. They're trying to go back to 2015. I don't think that really counts. There's very few of those guys, probably 3 or 4 of those guys in the entire squad that still are there from 2015. But I don't see Eddie's team. I know they troubled Australia. They made Australia look bad last week. I didn't see the game. I looked for it everywhere on channels. I couldn't find it. But, a 4-point win for the Wallabies wasn't what they would have probably wanted. But do you see Japan troubling us in any way?
Do you want
Nick,
to go
sorry.
with me?
Yeah, Nick,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
So I don't think so. I also don't think we're going to play the style of rugby that's going to suit Japan. You know, in that game which we lost in Brighton, we were fast and loose. We thought we were going to smash them by 40 points. And when you, just like the Australia game at Ellis Park, or sorry, Emirates Airline Park, when it gets away from you and you play a style of rugby that suits the opponent, you know, you're putting yourself into a ridiculous position. And it was proven with that Brighton game and also against Japan, as well as the game against Australia at Emirates Airline Park. So I think this coaching staff and the players have learned so many lessons from particularly that game against Australia. And we are going to take them on in the forwards. We're going to, I mean, remember the driving maul in 2019 where we went 55 meters, down the field straight after halftime. The game was not in the balance, but they were still quite close to us at halftime. And suddenly we had a 50-meter maul when I can't remember, Faf or Marks went over to score. And it was that game over, and I think that's how we're going to play against them. So it is going to be pretty direct and quite interesting to see whether the team that they've picked, and Sasha in particular, retains that game plan throughout the game, and make sure that we do play in the right areas. Horrible to say right areas of the field, but we should go from contestable kick to set piece to penalty to contestable kick. And when we're in there 25, we must roll them over with our big forwards, and if we do that, it could be a 30-pointer. I don't think Eddie Jones is going to get lucky this weekend.
Gav, straight after that, even if we get up on top and then the bomb squad comes in, quite a bomb squad, that Bulls front row of Steenekamp, Grobelaar and Lowe, Wilco, and then Andre Este is listed as a loose forward as well. That's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, actually, Andre Esterhuizen's another one of those players. I mean, I mentioned just now like when I mentioned the Sharks earlier, it was almost as if I was saying that none of the Springboks there play for the jersey. That's not quite true. Andre Esterhuizen has been really good, and funny enough, Ethan Hooker has been absolutely fantastic for them. And to me, it's actually, I mean, I know this is a digression, but sometimes it's to me it's interesting that both those guys, Andre Esterhuizen was age group at the Sharks. Ethan Hooker went to school at the Sharks. So, you've got two guys who probably dreamt when they were younger of playing for the Sharks senior team and coming through. But yes, Andre Esterhuizen as a loose forward, I'd love to see him play quite a bit of the game, actually, because we always talk about him as a loose forward, but then Rassie moves him there and everybody lauds Rassie and says, that's brilliant, like great thinking. But we haven't actually seen him play there often enough to know whether it actually really works or not. So that's what I'd like to see, is actually to see him. In fact, it would have been great if actually he got to start at flank. I mean, that would that would
Got
be
him as a number 7 at Peter Stiff to Toy.
yeah. It's just but I mean that's almost like denigrating Japan, and I'm not, because I agree with Nick. I think it probably will be at least 30 points, and actually and Nick might, because Nick was probably was the coach of the very first game I watched at Wembley, the BOKS play. It was against Wales, where you were saved by Streaker. Remember that?
Yeah.
There was a bearded naked guy who ran onto the field when the BOKS were really struggling, and I'm trying to remember if I've seen the BOKS apart from that game, actually, because they played the Barbarians there, I think in Tutti's era, in Alistair Coetzee's era, and they drew. It was Patrick Lambie who captained that side. So it'll be great to see the BOKS actually win comfortably at Wembley, because I can't remember. I might be missing something, but I can't ever remember them winning a game comfortably at Wembley. So there's that little side of me, having been to Wembley quite a few times and seen the BOKS struggle there. But yeah, Brendan, it is a good bomb squad. That always is a good bomb squad with the BOKS, and I think that Nick's right. The BOKS will play the right game against Japan. I mean, that's a lesson that was learned quite a while ago. I mean, it was a lesson that was learned in Japan in 2019. So, it's almost become irrelevant 2015 now, because the BOKS won both their previous games against them quite comfortably.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the things I wrote about yesterday, I just want to get both of you guys' opinion on, is the other thing that is maybe an unintended consequence, or maybe it is intended with Rassie, because he doesn't leave much to chance, is that with this 5-week tour, it's almost simulating a World Cup run, because we saw in the Rugby Championship that a bunch of the players were talking about when they got to the Wellington game about this being a quarterfinal, and then the Argentina, a bunch of them said this is like a semi-final, then the Twickenham game, a final. And I sort of wondered about that, and I thought, well, if you're going to go into a World Cup, the chances are you're going to play a team like Japan somewhere in the pool round. And then you'll play the pool, the other pool favorite. And then you'll go off and you'll probably play another lower ranked team, and then you'll play somebody like Ireland in a quarter final or something like that. So it's almost like a mini sort of scenario for a World Cup. 5 opponents, varying strengths, because I don't think Wales or Italy you can put in the same category as Ireland and France. But yeah, that you've got a week on where you have to be switched on, big opponent week with a little bit lesser, then a big opponent again like that. So just want to get both your opinions on that. It worked out quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, I think that what Rusky's been very really good at is resetting goals each time. So he'll go through the Northern Hemisphere tour last year was ending up a good season. They won, I think, what was it, 12 out of 14? I'm not sure, something like that. Then they had the pre-rugby championship, which was a block in its own, blooding new players, getting opportunities to play against lesser teams. Italy and Georgia, with respect, aren't quite up there yet. And then obviously the rugby championship was another block where he was going to blood players. And this Northern Hemisphere, I think he's probably said to them, listen, this gives us a great opportunity to play 5 games away from home. We don't have any in front of our own crowds. We have to come and produce the goods, even though they might be, psychologically you're going to go in against Japan and against Italy probably and against Wales without quite the butterflies in your stomach that you will when you play against Ireland or against France. Remember, the Ireland have won, I think we've only won once out of 5 times against them or something like that. So we owe them one now badly. But France is a tough one for us. And I think there's going to be a lot of bloody pressure on those 2 games. And it's a question of whether we can still perform when we're not at the peak of our emotional intensity. Do you get what I mean? I mean, sometimes South Africa need a knock, and then when we get a knock, we come back. Well, it was quite interesting this year. It knocked our confidence, so we didn't perform well in Cape Town. But then we got a knock in Eden Park, and geez, we turned it around at Wellington. I mean, so there is an opportunity. South Africans are good. But what we're not so good at is replicating performance after performance after performance when we think we're stronger than the team we're playing against. So this is a lesson that they're going to have to learn on this tour. And it's one, you're 100% correct, that we are going to face in a World Cup in 2027.
Gav, your thoughts?
Yeah, Brent. Yeah, well, Nick sort of said exactly what I was going to say. I was going to talk about a roller coaster of pressure, like in the sense of like this week. And I think South African fans will agree with me. I don't think there's anybody that's really sort of anxious about, I'm talking about the fans who do get anxious. I mean, There are people out there who sit and gnaw their nails, and the game. In fact, there's people who don't enjoy rugby that much when it's a really big game, because you sit there and you sort of and you sort of think in this and because you take it almost so seriously, and Brendan, you'll vouch for it. I mean, we sat and watched, and we were at the Kruger Park a couple of weeks ago and watched that game in Twickenham when the BOKS were struggling in the first half, and I had to sort of get up and walk around the room because it was just like it was so frustrating, and it was anxious because the BOKS deserved to win the championship, and for a while it looked as if they were going to make it difficult for themselves, and suddenly we had like a close game like we had at Kings Park the week before. Remember, up until half time. Remember, there was those bizarre things. So this weekend, it's almost like you can watch the BOKS and you can just enjoy it. And it's, you expect them to win, which people probably did think back in September 2015, by the way, but I don't think that's going to happen again. And then the next week is a really anxious day. It's like one of those days where, everybody's going to be on tenterhooks and nobody's going to really be breathing easily until the final whistle blows in that game. So, and then the following week it's Italy. So you expect them to win, and you don't mind if Italy get an early lead or something. It's that kind of thing. I think that's what really Nick's talking about as well, is that you get that in a World Cup where you get, like, for instance, when the World Cup was here in 1995. That game against Australia was a huge start to the tournament, and then a couple of days later, we were back in Cape Town, back at Newlands for the game against Romania, and it was a sort of step down. And then they played Canada, and then there was a big fight. So all sorts of weird things happened. And then suddenly they played against Samoa, if I remember correctly, in the in the quarterfinal. It wasn't so because you expected them to win, and then you went into the real sort of pressure again. So that's where this does replicate a World Cup, is that you've got, as I said, a roller coaster of pressure. You've got the lesser pressure moments, and then you've got the high pressure moments. And I think that's what a World Cup is until you get to maybe the quarterfinal stage, and then it's probably just pressure all the way through to the finish.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we're going to leave the French talk for next week because we've got a lot to talk about there. I think we'll probably do a longer pod there. But just quickly, lastly, on the other games, big game in Chicago, All Blacks Ireland. A big one for Scott Robertson, big one that. And then England, Australia is the other big one of the weekend. It's going to be quite interesting to watch. Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, just New Zealand, Ireland, two teams that have underperformed, I think, this season, in terms of expectation. And I think it's a bit, as you say, it's one that Robertson is desperate to win. I mean, he's gone in with not many changes. He's they've still got their issues around not the front row, but the lock, a big ball carrying 7. They haven't got one. They haven't got a physical 8. The game they play is still the ball in hand one, and they don't seem comfortable with the aerial game and putting people under pressure through their forwards in the kicking game. So Ireland don't have any complications around that. They anywhere in their half, they're going to stick it up in the air and they're going to pressurize you. And as they get closer to your line, they play the ball in hand rugby, 12 phases, 13 phases, win penalties. So it's going to be a tough game for New Zealand, but they need to win it, I think, just for Robertson's sake. I think England have a good chance against Australia. I think that Australia were lucky to get back and beat them last year. And something's going on there. I just think there's something's moving there in that England setup. They've got some decent outside backs. They've got 3 good fly-offs. They've got a variety of players who can replace each other in lots of positions. They've always had strength. They've always had depth, but it's the level of their depth that isn't as good as ours. We have international best at tight head, second tight head, and third tight, whereas they'll have 3 tight heads of the same level, but they're not as good as ours. So, but I just think they're just improving. They're getting a little bit better. So I think England could take that one against Australia.
Gav, your thoughts?
Yeah, Brendan, again, I'm sorry, it sounds like it's like Wednesday, so it's a day I agree with everything anybody says. But,
sorry, Gav.
No, it's okay. It's just, well, look, I think there's pressure on Australia now because there was all that talk after the Lions series that they'd improved, and then they came out here and they beat us at Ellis Park. By the way, Nick, it is Ellis Park now again, apparently, because there's no longer the sponsorship.
Okay.
Yeah, I was informed this the other day, and it's actually no longer the Emirates Lions either. It's now the Lions, just the Golden Lions.
Okay.
But as I say, I didn't know that until a couple of days ago. Just looking at Australia, there was so much talk about them, about their growth, and just towards the end of the Rugby Championship, I think we said it in one of these podcasts. Towards the end of the championship, I said that I was a bit disappointed in Australia, the way they eventually went down to New Zealand twice. I expected them to be more competitive, and as you say, that they only just scraped home against Japan last week. So I think this is a huge moment for Australia. If Australia want to sort of to show the world that they are improving, because I do think that this England team is going to be a team on the rise going forward. And I read a piece today. They're talking. Borthwick's getting quite creative. I mean, he's talking about playing Pollock on the wing and things like that, and he's almost becoming a bit sort of Russie-esque. Although I should also say Mallett-esque, because Mallett did talk about Bobby Skidstad as a centre years ago.
Yeah,
but he's starting to become quite creative, Borthwick. But then we know what England are like, though. So there's always this huge excitement before they play. And then if they play on Saturday and they're not good, then the press will hammer them because it's always like glass half full or glass. I mean,
exactly.
It's always like purple prose or the opposite with the English media with England. So this time next week we might be talking about an England team in crisis because their media will say they're in crisis. I mean, that's the way that it works. So, but they've got a lot of talented players coming through, and I think, as Nick says, I don't think they're necessarily as good as our fly halves, but they've got 3 different fly half options. It's starting to look quite promising for England. they've moved out of the post Eddie Jones era, and Borthwick's starting to sort of inspire more confidence in people. I think he didn't for quite a while, and so that's going to be interesting. The All Black Ireland game. Ireland have have had quite a good record against the All Blacks in recent times. I mean, if you ignore the quarterfinal, the World Cup quarterfinal, so it's easy to sort of foresee Ireland winning again, particularly in Chicago. I would imagine that half the Irish nation, well, the American side of the Irish nation will be there. So I've sort of got a funny feeling that they'll win. I don't know. One of the things, and I maybe can ask you, Nick, is just, the one thing I often think about though is that, like, Ireland haven't played since the Six Nations, and normally they would have last played in July because then they would have gone on tour in July. But this year the Lions went on tour. I know there were lots of Irish players in the Lions team, but it's still not Ireland. England last played in the Six Nations as well because they went to Argentina, but and France. France to me is interesting. Okay, maybe this is a conversation for next week. But France, because they sent a second or even third string team to New Zealand, they haven't played since March. I don't know how much of an effect that might have. The fact that the Southern Hemisphere teams are battle hardened, maybe fatigued as well, though. But they're battle hardened, whereas the opposing sides are fresh, but also possibly might have a gelling problem early on because they haven't played since March. I don't know what you think of that, Nick. It's something that I keep trying to get.
No. It's a very valid point. When you think of the internationals going back into our teams, how difficult it was to get them to perform. And Leinster's a classic example too. Leinster got smashed by Munster, and they put all their best, they put up at least half of their internationals in their team, and Munster playing away from home against Leinster, gave them 20-odd points, if I remember, in the URC. So it's not just a South African problem. It's an international problem. When your guys are focused on another competition, the human body just can't focus on the one that they're having at the moment, which was the URC. I think the Irish need to really pull themselves together, because the way that Leinster team that had the internationals played against Munster was very disappointing. They didn't play with that urgency and aggression, which you need at Test match level. And so, hopefully for Ireland, the guys that are getting a bit older can still raise their game, because it is an aging team, Ireland, at the moment. Very skillful, well coached, but it's an aging team, and I think they might be found out this year.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We'll have a lot more to talk about after the game. Have a look again on Sunday. We'll have this up again. And then next week's the big one, the revenge match for France, or their revenge match, not so much for us. But guys, thanks, Nick. Gav, have a good weekend and enjoy the game. Let's hope it's a great one to talk about Sunday.
Lovely. Thanks, Brendan. Cheers, Gab.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, Nick.